Dr. Mohita let me know just some time back that she's got caught into an important meeting. So I'm filling in. I hope I'm able to do justice to this talk, which was spoken for a different forum earlier. So surface ablation is an important talk for the postgraduates. So let's try to make it as relevant to them. Essentially, what we need to remember is the excimer laser and PRK is what actually opened the realms of refractive surgery 2 to 3 decades back. But what happened at that time, why they got temporarily stumped was the protocols were not well defined and the high refractive errors were being corrected on a PRK mode, and we did not have the wound modulating agents. So haze and regression were the bugbears at that time. There was a study which looked at the way the LASIK survey in US and Europe, and what they came to find was around 2007, there was a resurgence of surface ablations. And what was also interesting was that they came to realize that there was a small group of eyes which were coming up and which had developed iatrogenic ectasia in low to moderate myopias. So then the proponents got together and realized that we had to temper our understanding and usage of refractive surgery, and certain ground rules were laid. As far as surface ablations were concerned, the advantage here is you are able to preserve more tissue. You are not making that vertical cut on the flap. So this becomes an advantage in thinner corneas. Also in moderate dry eyes, wherein flap-based procedure, there is greater cutting of the corneal nerve plexus. And also because biomechanically, we are not making that vertical cut on the flap, the anterior collagen lamellae, which are very tightly packed in the superficial area, they are not getting as strongly bisected when you're doing a surface ablation. The other reason why surface ablation came back was also the smooth laser profiles with the flying spot lasers with the aspheric patterns which came in. So these seem to do a better addressal of the higher order abrasions, and our understanding of the epithelial maps which are there now took us forward. However, with surface ablation, it makes sense to limit our corrections to not more than 50 to 75 microns largely, although there are certain centers wherein they are doing high myopic errors too. But as an average, I would say up to -4 to -6 should be our cutoff. We should avoid making optic zones smaller to correct more, because this again causes haze, and also haze is seen even in the hyperopic ablations. Now, mitomycin C is come to of use in surface ablations, but it continues to be an off-label use. There have been some interesting reports which have said that there are less occurrence of ectasia in mitomycin-treated surfaces, but you cannot conclude on that. But what we need to know is mitomycin does not deplete the functional reserve of keratocytes. It actually prevents hyperproliferation of keratocytes and especially those irregular generated material which cause scars. So then, keeping surface ablation and the mitomycin together, we are now able to correct standard refractive errors, thinner corneas. We could do post-flap complications wherein the primary procedure failed. It can be used as an enhancement tool. It can be used as PTK options. And more also now, in mild to moderate keratoconus, we are able to use it as a topographic regularizing treatment along with cross-linking. So I'm just briefly showing you, like if you've had a vertical breakthrough in a femtosecond laser, you can't do that procedure now. So you could do a surface ablation in a small eye wherein you've had an inadequate flap, or you've had a buttonhole, or you've had a partial flap. These are all primarily because they were topographically, these were not ideal cases for doing microkeratome procedures. So in all of these, if you do a surface ablation, you are able to salvage the size. And again, in post cataract, especially in the premium IOLs, if you have a residual refractive error, you could do surface ablation as a bioptics procedure. And these are different ways forward. The other advantage is now we have more ablation profiles to work with. Like earlier, there was the wavefront guided, which was essentially looking at the refractive error and correcting the higher order abrasions. Then came in the wavefront optimized, which continue to be very promising. And now today, we are able to do topo guided treatments on the surface ablation platform. We also have come to understand that epithelium should be removed from the periphery to the center, either by mechanical debridement or alcohol. But it's important that you avoid prolonged exposure on alcohol, avoid overhydrating these corneas. Remember, we should avoid treating thinner corneas. Just because I said it needs lesser tissue to be removed, you cannot get overly aggressive with these thinner corneas. We should leave at least enough 300 as a residual bed. And of course, epithelial map teaches us a lot. As far as the different modalities of doing it, there was a time when LASIK was popular, wherein in all of them, first you use chilled BSS to cool take care of the pain component and the inflammation. And then a Trifine is used wherein 70% absolute alcohol was placed for 20 seconds, and this loosened the epithelium and allowed the ease of removal. Besides the mechanical debridement, you could do the EpiLASIK, wherein this plastic separator was used to separate the Bowman's and the basement membrane and create a cleavage plane. Or you could do a transepithelial PRK, wherein a PTK mode is used to remove the epithelium, and then you go on to doing your refractive correction. Earlier machines, we had to alter a nomogram. We needed to add a 0.5 to our refractive correction when you're doing a surface ablation treatment. But now we have the Streamlight, which has come, which has its own inbuilt algorithm, wherein it gives those extra pulses in the periphery, which counter the hyperopic shift which can occur when you're removing the epithelium in a PTK mode. As far as the pain is concerned, we could use chill BSS to chill the nerve endings. You could place ice packs about 15 minutes before, or you could place a BCL following the procedure to allow the epithelium to cover up properly, or Acuvale, which is a contact lens with a non-steroidal antibiotic drop soaked, which could be used as various modalities to address the pain component. The haze is a big challenge when you're talking of surface ablation. And when does it come? It comes when you're treating high refractive errors. If there has been some reason for delay in epithelialization, the stromal surface is irregular, when there has been an excessive exposure to UV light, that's why you need to insist on wearing protective dark glasses for these patients. If you have inadvertently damaged the basement membrane or injured the Bowman's membrane, or if your mitomycin sponge does not adequately cover the area of cornea to be treated. And this haze could start as early as very early weeks and go on to 6 months. Today, we better understand how to deal with this haze which comes with surface ablation. One, we have the advanced ablation profiles. We have the flying spot lasers. We now use large optic zones. The sudden transition zones are again issues which can cause haze, and the alcohol assisted does better than the mechanical debridement. We use protective eyewears. We use systemic usage of ascorbic acid, like in our centers, we use it BD dosage for 6 weeks. Then topical steroid drops, which has to be used on a tapered regime over 2-3 months. And of course, cyclosporin and plasma-rich growth factors have to be added on. Now, mitomycin, which I had earlier alluded to, has anti-proliferative and cytotoxic effect. And the usage of this now has expanded its options to not only use it for every routine case, but those areas where you expect regressions or retreatments or post-RK or keratoplasty operated eyes. The challenge in surface ablation is, because we're going to be using steroids for a longer period of time, and because these are young myopes, they could be steroid responders. Supposing you are left with you notice a haze, these patients might have stopped their topical steroid drops. You could start them and deal with that. Or sometimes you may be forced to do a PTK and remove the area of haze and apply mitomycin C and deal with that moment. Now, the understanding of epithelial modeling tells us that the epithelium healing is more based on the rate of change of curvature. And this remodeling is something very specific in myopes and in hyperopes. So the present usage of larger optic zones is what comes to play in helping us to have lesser regressions and better refractive predictability. However, there is a high variability in KC eyes, which is where we are able to understand a little more in diagnosing early cases. Epithelial mapping, besides great use in surface ablation, has also these uses of diagnosing an early KC, looking at our CXL outcomes, and also evaluating the refractive surgical complications. Now, this is a fairly routine topography which you're seeing, but if you have an access to the epithelial map, you understand that if you could feed in an average of 60 micron instead of the standard 50 micron, you are able to do better. Now, surface ablation has come to play even in enhancement procedures, because what we now understand is within 3 years, you could relift the flap and go ahead and treat with less chances of epithelial ingrowth occurring. But beyond 3 years, there's a greater possibility of epithelial ingrowth. And beyond 3 years, it now makes sense to do surface ablation as a tool for enhancement procedures. We have now to understand topo-guided treatments better. Now, in topo-guided treatment as a way of tool of treating the surface, with the surface ablation program. Like this was a patient who had a free flap and it was not appropriately placed and he ended up having a very irregular cornea. So herein, you are able to do a bimodal treatment, a combining a myopic and a hyperopic combination program. You're able to regularize the topography, and after 6 weeks or 3 months, you could go ahead and do a refractive correction on a wavefront optimized mode and get to the moment. Now we've heard a beautiful talk of biomechanics and Ora and Corvus. So then with that understanding and understanding little more of cross-linking, we now feel that yes, this has a role in restoring the strength of the cornea in some extent. Of course, the query was that would this have a refractive impact? So, but what we understood now is that if you have a borderline topography, a low diopter of correction or retreatments, you could do surface ablations with cross-linking and using half the fluence and the duration of time as specified. The only important thing you need to understand here is you would have to use mitomycin even if you're doing a PRK extra, because mitomycin is not going to reduce the effect of cross-linking, but it would take care of the migratory keratocytes and will prevent the haze occurrence. Surface ablations has come to play its role in form frustrate keratoconus. Like what we now know is that if you are able to make a small steep cone, make it a broader cone by flattening the central steep area and lifting up the mid periphery and making it a larger, flatter cone, it would better address the biomechanical strain of the cornea. So there were a number of proponents who came forward to say that, yes, go ahead, let's do topo-guided PRK with cross-linking. But then the other query was, the controversy was, would you do topo-guided PRK and cross-linking at the same time? Yes, it made sense because you are doing a topo-guided PRK. If you were to cross-link the eye first and then later do a topo-guided PRK, you would have actually removed the cross-link tissue. And again, we do not have nomograms for a cross-link tissue, so we would not be able to do an appropriate refractive correction on these eyes. So then a lot more understanding came in and we started understanding that yes, if we are going to do a topo-guided PRK on early and mild keratoconus, you will do it simultaneously. And then the other thing we understood was that if you could do a PTK mode of removing the epithelium, this seemed to by itself regularize the topography to an extent and improve the BCV of these eyes, and then go ahead and cross-linking seemed to be the way to go. Taking you through one more example in what I had discussed earlier. Now, this was a patient with a Fram keratoconus and an uncorrected vision of 636. So if you are able to do a topo-guided treatment in these eyes, like if you could make the manifest 0 and you look at the map, you're guzzling up 27 micron of tissue in these eyes. So understanding that you could go up to 50 or 60 micron, if you're able to bring out the full cylinder correction or most of it, along with some amount of the spherical correction, and you look at the anterior float and look at the pattern of ablation which is there, and if these correlate, then you could go ahead and do a topo-guided treatment on a PRK mode, and then go ahead and give a full bone cross-linking of 10 milliwatts for 10 minutes, 9 milliwatts for 10 minutes. Now, this is the third case which I wanted to show you all. This is a post-LASIK ectasia. Even in post-LASIK ectasia, if the corneal thickness allows, you are able to do a topo-guided PRK with cross-linking and go ahead and deal with them and give them a vision, uncorrected vision of 6/9 from the poor BCVA which they had earlier. So essentially, I would like to conclude there's a lot more which has evolved in topo-guided PRK. But what I would want us to all understand is the way surface ablation stands today, it's become a major portfolio to treating thinner corneas, to treating complicated corneas, to treating post-LASIK complications. And this has to come to hold a major place in the refractive armamentarium. Yes, there is a longer recovery time. We have to be realistic in our expectations, but yes, it has come to stand again. Thank you very much.